This is a very crucial and dangerous time in history for the world at large. Global climate change is severe. Will not be 100 years from now. Governments are battling inflation and trying to stabilize their own currencies. Investors are anxious as we are entering a more difficult economic cycle. Civil strife is occurring throughout the world, including our own backyard. And the risk of war among great nations is rising. If all these risks materialize, the entire system fails, and therefore we lose both individually and collectively. So we have to rethink the future of investment to make it sustainable, resilient, and leading to the common good. Over the last couple of years, we have been working to build a new company called Atlas that brings together the private and the public sector to address this macro risk in a more collective and integrated manner. Our goal is threefold. First, to understand the potential impacts of different types of risks. Second, to protect investors' assets and deliver high-quality returns. Third, foster the common good by making smart and sustainable investments. Atlas is rolling out a new index that will help investors do two things. First, to invest into assets that are similar to those they invest today, but in a new product and construct that provides a better risk-reward profile. Second, invest with purpose and invest for good. Invest in the health and wellness of a nation. To do this, we devise what we call the 3 Cs. The 3 pillars of a country's prosperity: credit, commodities, communities. Credit is treasuries that have good ratings from agencies, high liquidity, and full faith and credit in international financial markets. Commodities are gold that protects you against inflation and socio-political and geopolitical risks. Water and food that provide you personal security. And what we call green metals, copper, rare earths, cobalt, and such, to redesign the electric grid and make it more sustainable. The 3rd C is communities. Farmland, infrastructure, commercial residential real estate that builds sustainable and resilient communities across North America. We at Atlas believe in the concept of beyond returns. We of course want to hit our investment return goals, but at the same time would like to improve the global economic system in a sustainable and holistic way. We're not trying to reinvent the investment wheel here. We want our clients to invest into assets that are similar to the one they do today, using the same financial intermediaries that they trust, and in the economies that they are already exposed to today. We believe that the Atlas Index provides them a better construct to do the same. We're starting with an index that can be invested in using total return swaps, but we're also developing ETFs and digital assets that are security tokens backed by the underlying assets: treasuries, gold, public REITs, real estate. We're working with Goldman Sachs to design and launch our index and bring it to a broad investors base. We're working with global regulators to launch our products thoughtfully and carefully. We're also working with large institutional investors that have a dual goal of achieving high returns on investments, but also investing for the long-term public good. This is a very crucial time in history, as there are major risks out there that are going to affect the world economy and the world at large. We cannot resolve these problems alone. We have to resolve them collectively. So our economic policies, our investments have to be not just for the private return, but also for the common good, domestically and globally. Now is the time to come together. Now is the time to take action for our own individual sake and for the collective sake.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, it's really great pleasure and honor to be back to Abu Dhabi and to UAE. This city and this country is an island of stability, social, economic, financial, and political, in a world that is increasingly risky, dangerous, volatile, and unstable. It is fair to say that we're living today in times of unprecedented, unusual, unexpected uncertainty for use. I just published a book titled Mega Threats, 10 Dangerous Trends in Parallel Future and How to Survive Them, in which I discussed serious major threats that imperil not only our economic and financial future, economy as a market, but also threats to our planet and threats to the world at large and to humanity. We're living in times in which policy mistakes have severe consequences, even for countries like the United Kingdom and Russia, that have economic, political, and security consequences. We've lived for the last 30 years in a period of great moderation, where inflation was low, growth was stable, US and global equities were rising, and safe assets were also giving you positive returns as bond yields were falling and the price was going up. The world of great moderation is over, and we're entering now a new stage, a regime of what I call great stagflationary and debt crisis and instability. A variety of negative aggregate supply shocks will reduce growth and increase inflation, and together with loose monetary, fiscal, and credit policies, they're going to lead not only to inflation, not only to recession, and therefore to stagflation, but also to severe debt crisis, as we have large stocks of private and public debts that are becoming unsustainable. These are global risks, but even the United States, where I live, that is the strongest economy in the world, is subject to these kind of pressures. In the last decade, we have very loose monetary, fiscal, and credit policies, and a polarized political system. So the role of the US dollar and the US financial system as the stable anchor for the US and the global economy is at risk itself. We have to think about designing a monetary system that is not just based on trust, fiat currencies, but is based on something more stable, hard, real, and financial assets. If we want to make sure that US and US assets remain a destination for investors and we maintain the stability of the global economy. In this world that is unstable and volatile, where inflation is rising, even traditional investment paradigms are breaking down, are failing. Typical investment advice is 60-40, 70-30, or even variants of it like risk parity. Invest in a combination of risky assets like US and global equity and safe assets like long-term US treasuries. That model works because usually we have a negative correlation between equity prices and bond prices, risk on, risk off, growth and recession. But when inflation is not low and is rising, you lose money on your equities as the discount factor for dividends is rising, and US and global equity this year have fallen by 20% plus, but you also lose money on the fixed income component of your portfolio because a rise in bond yield implies a fall in their price. And this year, for the first time in decades, bond and equity prices have fallen at the same time, and bond prices have fallen more than equity prices. So safe assets like treasuries have done worse than equities. We have about $20 trillion equivalent of fixed income assets that are in the portfolio of sovereign wealth funds, private and public pension funds, endowment, foundation, family offices, investor retail that are at risk. This year, that fixed income has lost 25% of its value. There was nowhere to hide. So you have to find alternatives that provide you safety against the various risks that we're facing right now. What are these risks? The risk of inflation, stagflation, debasement of fiat currencies, the damage coming from global climate change, a geopolitical depression that's going to lead potentially even to hot war between great powers, and social and political instability, as the rise of income and wealth inequality, economic malaise leads to a backlash against liberal democracy. So what's the alternative? For the last couple of years, myself and my team and Atlas Capital team, we've been working for alternatives that provide you safety and stability. So I'm very excited today to announce the launching of the Atlas Capital Benchmark Index that is live today on Bloomberg and has been designed, developed in collaboration with Goldman Sachs. There are 4 elements to this index that I think are important. First, its composition is a combination of short treasuries and TIPS that provide you a hedge against rising inflation and the debasement of fiat currencies. Gold that provides an hedge not only against inflation and financial crisis, but also against social, political, and geopolitical instability. And other commodities are also reliable. And finally, sustainable real estate in the form of public REITs, sustainable because even in North America, global climate change is going to lead to stranded assets in real estate, commercial and residential. A combination of these assets provide you better returns. Secondly, as we back-tested this index over time, we found it does well in good times and does even better on a risk-adjusted basis when there is volatile times of rising inflation. Third, we believe that you shouldn't just maximize your returns. Of course, you want to do that. You do want to do well, but you also want to do good. In a world that is unstable, where to invest in infrastructure, in community, in more resilient types of investments. So you want to do well and you want to do good. And that's one of the aspects of what we want to do. 4, we have a product roadmap. We're starting with an index over which you can use it for doing total return swaps, but the next year we're at the level of ETFs and digital assets that are backed by real and financial assets. So these are security tokens backed by real and financial assets. Now, what we're trying to do at Atlas is not just to derive a new financial instrument that provides you a hedge against inflation, against the debasement of fiat currencies, and monetary and financial instability. We have the ambitions of thinking that we have to reform the domestic and international monetary system and design a new international store of value and a new potential reserve currency. There are 4 elements to our strategy. First, the idea of creating a monetary system, domestic and international, that is not based only on fiat, is not a new idea. And some of the recent attempts, like developing cryptocurrencies and assets, have been a miserable failure because they're not backed by anything. They're vaporware backed by nothing, as opposed to being backed by real assets and financial assets. We believe that we can design a system that is better, but this system has to have the following characteristics. It has to be stable, it has to be secure, has to be transparent, has to be scalable, has to be non-speculative, has to be adoptable, it has to be backed by real and financial assets, and has to be properly regulated and supervised with the appropriate amount of AML and KYC. That's what we're designing at Atlas. Secondly, you need a private-public partnership to develop a new international monetary system. And we're working together, private and public sector, to ensure inputs, adoption, development, and distribution of these assets. We're working with sovereign wealth funds, with banks, with regulators, with governments, with other financial institutions to design and develop this new international and financial monetary system. Third, we need collective responsibility for the common good. As we live in a world in which there is fragility, volatility, and instability because of economic and political and geopolitical risk, of course, we need to have a collective responsibility to develop financial instruments that are more stable, more secure, and more viable. However, as the world also deals with human, climate, social, and health crises, we also need to develop investments that provide you return beyond traditional returns, that provide stability, common good, community, and broader collective benefits. Finally, we think that solutions that are built with hard assets in deep partnership between the private and public sector have the strongest guardrails and the greatest likelihood for long-term success. Therefore, we invite everybody, private sector, public sector, in the US and abroad, to work with us to resolve these problems. Final point, we live in a world of severe and threatening mega threats, as I pointed out, put at risk our economies, our financial system, the planet, and our own global security. We've been keeping to kick the can down the road for the last few decades. We put our head under the sun like ostrich, forgetting about the threats we're facing. It's time now to act and resolve collectively these mega threats. Otherwise, the world is going to be doomed. And we're working together with all of you to achieve a better future for this country, for this region, and for the world at large. Thank you very much for your attention.